Hey, digestible listeners. This week we are on winter break, but we have a great re release for you. We are going to bring you back Dr. Ethan Kross, author of Chatter and Shift, best-selling books. If you still need a last minute holiday gift, these would be great. If you are looking to make some changes in the new year, start reading. So listen to Dr. Kross and enjoy, and we'll see you in the new year.
Ethan Kross, PhD, two-time national best-selling author of Shift and Chatter, is an award-winning professor in the University of Michigan's top-ranked Department of Psychology and its Ross School of Business. He is the director of the Emotion and Self-Control Laboratory. Ethan has participated in policy discussion at the White House, spoken at TED and South by Southwest, and consulted with some of the world's top executives and organizations. His research has been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the New Yorker, the New England Journal of Medicine, and Science. Ethan's first book, the international bestseller Chatter, has been translated into over 40 languages. Ethan Kross, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's always great to see you.
So we're really excited to talk about your book Shift, and we're also going to talk about your previous book Chatter. I listened to both your books, and then I bought the books. I do that a lot, and
We like
Staci,
that. Oh yeah, that's great.
you're
Listen
welcome.
and buy, even better. Yes, thank you.
But Staci and I both agreed. We really found your voice to be very soothing. Staci, I know you
Yeah.
wanted to mention something.
I did. So I love to listen to a book. I did end up actually like physically buying them too because they're awesome. And I think it's easier to like hand it to someone and be like, you have to read this. But I did listen first. And I think the reader of a book, because I listen to a lot of books, like makes or breaks it. You've got the best voice. And now I feel
Oh,
like I
thank you.
know you and you're my friend because I've listened to you. I hope
I
that's
mean,
not
what?
creepy.
No, 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 no. You want to hear a funny aside? When my first book came out, it was right during the pandemic, and my family and I were planning a road trip to see my in-laws, and my kids were not behaving in the days leading up to that trip, and so. What was most effective in mobilizing behavior change was to tell them, hey guys, listen, if you don't get your acts together, we're listening to Daddy's audiobook on repeat and slow motion for the entire trip to Atlanta.
That's
Like, which
great.
was, and like, it was amazing. They just like lined up and started like
Oh,
no. So,
That's
good
great.
to hear that
Yeah,
that
you've
other
got a
folks don't
great
have the same
voice.
phobic response. Yeah.
No, you've
yes.
got a great voice. Okay, so this was one of my favorites just because it felt very relatable to where I'm at in my life and where I think a lot of our listeners are too. So, in your latest book, Shift Managing Emotions So They Don't Manage You, you write that how we think about our circumstances shapes the emotions we experience, and then those emotions reverberate back to influence how we think. You give a great example of going into the SATs, which we are very much like in that college testing phase in my house, and thinking you are bad at taking tests. Can you explain that to us? Because I feel like that information was like so useful for any person.
Yeah. So, let's say you're concerned about your scores, and so you start thinking to yourself, I'm not going to do well. That thought is going to then elicit an anxious reaction like, oh, I'm not, what if I don't do well? And then what will happen? I won't get into my top choice. And so then you might start feeling the physiological symptoms of anxiety. So I'm like touching my palms, but that's because anxiety often manifests with like sweaty palms or stomach pains. And then your attention is going to zoom in and, oh, my palms are sweating, or I have knots in my stomach. And then you're going to take that as evidence that, oh man, I'm really going to screw up because I'm not prepared. If I was prepared, I wouldn't be having stomach pains right now. And then the vicious cycle ensues. And so how you think can very powerfully impact how you feel. That discovery happened decades ago and was one of the big spikes on the timeline of discovery for intervention in this space. But what's super cool about that finding is you can think differently about something and it's going to change the way you feel. So I tell my kids when sometimes they get nervous before a sporting event, uh-uh, it's not, I can't do this. I'm going to screw up. It's like, you got this. Who's better than you to perform well in this space? And that just totally changes the emotional trajectory. I do that myself. I mean, I I've been giving talks for decades and sometimes to like huge audiences. And sometimes I'll look out like, oh wow, there's a lot of people out there. What if I screw up? And no, 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 I got this. And it just totally changes the trajectory. Anyone can do that.
I
Yeah,
like that. I
that's
think
great.
that's good advice.
Actually, I had a child just this morning say to me that they did not think they were ready for a foreign language test. And I said, well, is that what you're saying to yourself, that you're not ready? Are there some things that you can say to yourself that you know that are for a fact? You've been studying this all semester. You probably know most of what's on the test, if not
That's
all
right.
of it, And she's like, I know, but
Well, I keep saying that, the eye rolls, like I get those too, but then I find that like my kids start listening to what I say. They just don't like to give me any credit for it,
right.
and benefit from it. But like, so here's one finding that I think about a lot, especially in a parenting context. We know that when you put a human being in a stressful circumstance, they typically ask themselves two questions, and they often do this just like reflexively outside their awareness. What do I have to do? And then can I do it? Two basic questions. What's required of me? And do I have the resources to deal with what is required of me? If you ask yourself those questions and you say, nope, I don't have the resources to deal with this, that elicits what we call threat response, predicts poor behavior. It predicts negative physical health outcomes. It predicts poor subjective well-being. If you think to yourself, what's required of me and can I manage it? And you answer that question differently, say, yeah, I can do that. It predicts the mirror image set of outcomes, better performance, better health, better subjective well-being. What we know from lots of research is you can push that around. You can shift people from a threat response to a challenge response by just reframing the circumstance. I think that's what you tried to do for your kid this morning. And so I wouldn't be surprised if they come back with a good score on their foreign language exam.
Ooh, I guess we'll see.
Here's
Or
hoping.
test in real life. Okay.
At one point in
Great.
the book, you did flip it a little bit where you said, um, when you need to like boost yourself, instead of saying I've got this, if you like look in the mirror and you say you've got this. And I've
Right.
always talked to my kids and everyone about self-talk, and in my self-talk I say I. But I really liked how you flipped that, and talk a little bit about what that does, because now I'm going to change it.
Yeah. So let me ask the two of you this question. I think I know the answer, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Have you ever found yourself being really good at giving advice to other people, but not taking that advice yourself?
Of course.
Yes, right.
Right. Right. So this is like everyone answers the question that way. Like we're all giant hypocrites, and our kids see this immediately. Um, it can sometimes be hard for lots of very good reasons for us to activate on what we know is best when we ourselves are struggling. What we've learned is that being able to change your perspective, to think about yourself like you were someone else, can be really, really helpful in those circumstances. So being able to relate to yourself like you were coaching your friend. Now, how do you do that? Well, there are lots of different tools. One is this linguistic tool called distanced self-talk, which is, fancy phrase for a really simple self-talk shift, which is try coaching yourself through a problem using your own name and you rather than in the first person. So, all right, Ethan, how are you going to manage this situation? When I use the word you, when do we use the word you mostly? Like, not a trick question, guys. What do you think?
When you're
Well, we're
talking to
giving,
somebody else, we're
yeah,
giving
we're
Yeah,
giving
direction.
advice
yeah,
to someone
yeah.
else.
Like
Yep.
99.9% of the time, it's when you're talking to someone else. So think about how tightly linked that word is with thinking about other people. When you use the word you to refer to yourself, or when you use your name, it's putting you in this position. Oh, now I'm talking to another person. I'm giving advice to someone else. That makes it a lot easier for us to wisely work through our problems. And so that's probably one of the first tools that I personally use when I'm struggling with an issue. All right, how are you going to deal with this? Stop thinking about it this way. You've got a lot more experience here than you think, right? So it's a lot easier to give oneself that kind of encouraging advice in that linguistic mode than when you're in the first person.
Well, I wanted to let you know that. So I read Chatter when it came out, and I started doing that actually. And it works. And that's one of the tools, the very first tools of my toolbox that I now grab on a regular basis is the distance self-talk. So thank you for both books, but
One of my go-tos as well.
great. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I like that one a lot. So, another topic you bring up is the stay positive movement or positivity taken to the extreme, which I found this really interesting because I am definitely a glass half full. Let's always find the positive. But yeah, talk to us about how positive reframing can be bad and it can be good. Because I had never really thought about the fact that there could be a bad, dark side to positive reframing.
Sometimes we can delude ourselves into, so in general, positively reframing things can be really, really helpful. Being optimistic can be very useful, unless it's a situation that you can do something about the situation to fix it, but you positively reframe it in a way that prevents you from taking action. So let's say I have a toxic boss, and one thing I could do is like leave the job or take steps to heal the relationship, or I could just reframe it. That's just their personality. They like they like talking negatively about others. It's fine. Right. In those situations where there's something you can actually do to fix the situation, but you positively rationalize it, that can long term lead to some negative outcomes. I mean, like think about relationships with one's partner or even your kids, right? Like people do things that aren't desirable, and sometimes we can call them on it to try to help them improve, or we could just explain it away with those positive spins. And those positive spins just don't always work in that sense. Have you ever found yourself in those situations?
So the way Stacey and I are clearly related because I'm the same way. I'm always very like, well, it's okay because tomorrow's a new day or it can only get better. Just it helps you move forward. I definitely do sometimes find ways to accept things, but what it also does is I hear about people that try something and they don't succeed or they don't, they get discouraged really easily. And I think because of the way I'm structured, I'm just like, oh, that was a blow, but I'm going to do this. I've decided I'm going to do this. So it's a blow, but I'm going to get back up. Or I've decided I'm going to do this, so I'm going to do it. And so I feel like in that way, it's a positive thing. But yeah, for sure, I definitely could also then say, you know what, this could use a little bit of a tweak. This could use some improvement.
Yeah, I mean, like there's some cases of people who, um, like let's say you're unemployed, and there are things you can do to fix the situation, assuming you don't want to continue to be unemployed, right? It's causing hardship on you or your family. And rather than doing something about it, you just positively, reinterpret, well, the right job will come when the right job comes. Or, um, any other kinds of positive stories that you tell. That might not be adaptive in that sense, which is very different from the situation that you're describing. To be clear, being positive, there's loads of data which link it with very desirable outcomes across the board, from health to well-being to performance. Like anything, however, there's a time and place for it. And sometimes we also have to be realistic about things, right? And accept that negative circumstance there and learn from those negative experiences. And so that's where that whole little sidebar came into play.
Thank you.
Okay. So one quote from your book is, and this actually resonated with me a lot. It is certain that the emotions we experience are influenced by multiple distinct processes happening inside us for a purpose to help us manage the many different situations we find ourselves in. You use a wonderful story around that. I think the woman's name is Louisa, and she's the mother who has to save her child's life. And so obviously her emotions kicking in and her physiological response to all the things she needed to be able to do to save her child's life was very useful in that moment. That emotion was useful. But then she kind of downward spirals after that, and it becomes sort of, you know, overwhelming to her. And I think a lot of parents feel this way. How can our listeners and me distinguish when their emotion is useful, but then when it's also past that point, it can become harmful?
Yeah, so all emotions are useful when they're experienced in the right proportions, not too intense and not too long. Um, I think one of the big problems in current society is that we give people these goals to live lives free of negative emotions. Like, A, that's not possible. B, I don't think it's desirable. Anxiety helps prepare you for future threats. Anger helps you confront injustices that you can fix. Sadness helps you reflect on loss so you could find new meaning to move on with your life. So all those negative emotions, if you experience them, nothing wrong with you. That means you're working as we are supposed to be working as human beings. It is the case that sometimes they get triggered out of proportion, as you're describing and asking me about. How do you know when an experience is out of proportion? When it's undermining your ability to live the life you want to live, and it's getting in the way of you accomplishing your goals. um in some cases this is gonna be apparent, right? Like, you recognize that your worries about your kids is out of sync with the actual situation. If you find yourself, though, like, you've done everything you can to make sure your kid is safe, you've done the background reference check on the people hosting the birthday party and everyone in attendance to make sure that's safe for them. I'm joking, but um, right?
Right.
Like, you've done your due diligence, right? And then you find yourself thinking about these dark thoughts about your kid and what could happen after in ways that distract you from doing the other things you want. That's a cue. That's not the life I'm guessing that you want to be living. And so that would be a signal, hey, let me try to shift my emotional response there and see what happens when I do that. Like, am I putting my kid in more jeopardy if I do that or not? You could think about these shifts and playing with them as like running these little experiments on yourself. That sounds nefarious. It's not meant to be, but it's like, like, let's try this one tool and see if I like the way it works in my life. See if it makes things a little bit better. If it does, well, let me keep trying it. And if not, I can shift to something else. So it really is as simple as like, is are these emotional experiences getting in the way of you living the life you want to live? Like, when my anxiety about something gets too intense, the way I know it is I'm not focusing on what I want to be focusing on. Or when I'm on a walk with my wife, I'm talking about this thing over and over in ways that are objectively irritating to any other human being on the planet. Whereas I don't want to be doing that, right?
Right.
Those are the cues.
Okay. Well, I feel like I'm in therapy right now. There's something that actually someone mentioned to me lately, and that does actually, she said it happens to her, and I think this is a very common thing. We're running around all day, we're doing the things we have to do, we're getting life done, and then we get in bed, and we turn off the lights, and all the outside stimulus and all of the activities have quieted, and then all of the icky thoughts creep in,
Yeah.
like the worry and the icky, and what helps me is naming it. So I go, oh my God, I'm just joining all these women I know that are having the icky thoughts. Oh, well, okay, ladies, what's the icky thought coming in tonight? And when I name it and I make it sort of light, it it sort of dampens it a little bit. And then I try to distract myself with like thinking of a plot of a book or whatever, and then I can fall asleep. But is that like a strategy that people use? The naming it, is that something that?
You actually did two things there, I would say, when I
Okay.
was listening to you describe it. So naming it is, we call that affect labeling, and just catching yourself in the act can be powerful. Um, it can also be used. Well, the other thing that you described doing was normalizing it, right? You reminded yourself that there are lots of ladies, not just ladies, by the way, men too, who suffer from this. In fact, like, whenever I give a talk on this topic, and I've done this to tens or hundreds of thousands of people at this point, without fail, when I ask people, hey, you ever find that you have some problem with chatter at night, either before going to bed or in the middle of the night? Every hand in the room goes up. So
Wow.
you should, if you experience some of that, you are not alone. And that's what you just also did, right? You said other people experience this too. What can be so terrifying for a lot of folks is you wake up at 2 a.m. and you're thinking these crazy thoughts. I'm guessing, you haven't told me what they are, but I'm guessing they're probably like out of proportion with reality. Um, There's good reason for why your thoughts are out of proportion with reality at 2 a.m. Your prefrontal cortex, which we use to control how we think and feel and be objective, is not fully operational. It's being cleaned. And so you're kind of your brain's simulating all these possible scenarios, some of which can be terrifying. That is an incredibly common experience. Just understanding that often helps people with their chatter. If naming it helps, keep doing that. I will, for me, I distract myself. So the way I go to bed is I will, before I hit the pillow, I will think about a specific positive experience that has happened to my kids, my wife, me, and I'll just rehearse that and really like savor that experience, transport myself into it. When my kids were little, it was like their soccer adventures. I would just replay them over and over. Now it's other things. But, that's another tool you can use to kind of help you like slip into slumber.
That's great.
You know what I thought was interesting? You say in the book, there is a world of dark emotions that have a light side. I don't think I ever really thought about that until I read that, even though I'm sure somewhere in my head, logically, I must know that. Will you talk a little bit about that? Because it actually makes the dark emotions maybe not as scary.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one intention of shift is to just normalize the experience of negative emotions and get people to recognize that they're a part of life and they're a helpful part of life. So, um, take anger. Um, Once we experience anger, when our view of the world of what is right and wrong is transgressed, and we can do something to fix the situation. So when we register those conditions, we experience this emotion of anger, and it motivates us to fix stuff. So if my daughter does something dangerous, that's not how things should be. I confront her. Hey, let's not do this again. That's helpful. Anxiety alerts us to things that are important in the future, gets us to start preparing for them. As long as that doesn't get too intense, that can be really helpful. There's some things, some screw ups in my life. It's because I had no anxiety beforehand. I didn't like double check or second guess. Sadness. We experience loss. It's soul crushing. Like someone dies that we care about. We lose a job. Sadness is an emotion that motivates us to turn our attention inward to make sense of what's happening. All right, well, life is now fundamentally altered. There's nothing I can do to bring this person, this job, this relationship back. So now let me reflect on my new life and how I'm going to be successful in it, right? Like how am I going to navigate the experience? So sadness gets us to turn inward and try to make meaning out of what we're going through. That can be really helpful too. So all these negative emotions, they're powerful tools that help us manage this messy world. The big problem is that they're not experienced in moderate degrees. We experience them really intensely or they last too long. And that's where things get really troubling for many, many people. Now, the great news is in the same way that we evolved to experience all those negative emotions, we also co-evolved tools to manage them, like we've been talking about today. And so what what for me is so disheartening on the one hand, but hopeful on the other is we don't tend to teach people about these tools. Like we maybe teach our kids about these things in a haphazard way. So like the two of you know from trial and error, or maybe your parents, that having a positive attitude is useful. And so you model that for your kids, right? But you never got trained rigorously on the 30 or 40 emotion regulation tools that are out there. If you did, you'd probably be using those tools more in your own life and you'd be teaching your kids more about them, right? And our schools don't teach kids about these things either. And I think that's a real opportunity and a disservice if we don't address it.
It it made me sort of think of the example of like when someone wins an award and they go on stage and they give a speech like an Oscar, and at some point when they no longer have the time to talk, they turn the music on. So it gives the person who's giving the speech like a, all right, wrap it up. It's almost like, wouldn't it be nice if we had that internal like music that came on? Like, all right, I was really pissed, but then the music comes on. It's like, all right, that was useful. Now it is no longer useful. Wrap it up. I just,
Right.
it'd be nice if we had that internal
If we had both
switch
that cue and the
cue.
ability to actually then flip the switch.
Yeah,
I think, and
yeah.
those are two
Well,
separate skills.
you
Recon
do give some good
Yeah.
tools in your book. Do you have a favorite?
Do I have a favorite?
Well, that'd be for you, right? I want to touch on
Yeah,
that
for
too
me, I
because,
mean, it's, different tools work for different people, and we
right.
know combinations. I have a favorite set of tools. My favorite set of tools are, we talked about one, distant self-talk. Another is mental time travel. I think about how am I going to feel about this problem 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now. That highlights that what I'm going through is temporary. That's a good tool. I also like time traveling into the past. I think about how my experience compares to other things that I've lived through or that people I care about have gone through that are much worse. That helps. I love going for a walk in the Arboretum near our homes, and enhancing my exposure to green spaces, which for me is, if you knew me before I wrote these books, you would recognize that that is a very out of character pursuit because I grew up in cities and I've never been like a big camper. Don't really love bugs, but I love the hikes and doing that for what it can do for my mind, and I have a great emotional advisory board, chatter advisory board, people in my life who I can call without any hesitation or concern about judgment. Who will listen and then help me put my experiences in perspective. So that's my kind of package, my cocktail of favorite tools that I rely on when I get triggered in some way. And 60, 70% of the time, like that's all I need to do, and then I'm back on track. And when that's not sufficient, I go deeper into the toolbox.
That's great. Those are great. That's a great set. Stacy's one of my chatter advisors, 100%.
You guys
So,
talk during the day.
well, now we talk a lot because we're working
Yeah,
together.
almost every day now. But before it
Yeah.
was like every couple days.
So we both really enjoyed the story that you told about Dennis Rodman. And then in the parallel you made with your grandmother, which is like they're going to deal with their hard stuff. Well, it's different, right? Your grandmother, she would talk about her experience during World War II and surviving during the Holocaust on the run for her life and how she wouldn't talk about it with you, but every so often, maybe once a year, she would talk about it openly. And it was, you call it flexible avoidance. And that Dennis Rodman participated in that differently. He would so serious all the time with training and basketball and all the things that, and then he would just let loose. That was just his way of just disengaging.
And by the way, not to super interrupt, I apologize, but like, we're from Chicago, the Chicagoland area. Like, we're Bulls fans. Like, we watched all that happen. I had no idea that that's what Dennis Rodman was doing when he disappeared. I remember the scandal, but I never thought to try to understand what was happening. I thought he was just being like a, entitled
And then,
NBA
yeah,
bad boy. Yeah.
yeah. Well, so like I think so many of us hear that avoiding the bad stuff in life is something we should never do because it'll only bring misery and despair. Um, it is true that if we chronically avoid things, like something bad happens, and we just reflexively, I'm not thinking about it, pushing it aside. If that's your approach to regulating your emotions across the board, lots of data show that that doesn't help people out. Chronic avoidance is bad. But we've gone from that observation to overgeneralizing that all forms of avoidance are bad, and that's simply not true. Have either of you ever gotten an email that has provoked you and you decided to not respond right away? But you like took some time off to your benefit, right? Because you come back and you can write a much better response, or sometimes you decide I'm not going to respond at all. Is it fair to say that that's happened? Like,
Yes.
Oh,
so
yes.
that's a case of strategic avoidance, right? You're taking some time away, you're going to distract, absorb yourself in other healthy, productive practices, like go to the gym, do your work, spend time with your family, and then come back to the problem a little bit later. And you often have a different perspective. That's what Rodman was doing. That's what my grandmother did, right? She didn't want to think about the war all the time. So she distracted, she avoided thinking about it, but she allowed herself to revisit it one time a year, or if she bumped into someone who was also a survivor every now and again. That can be a super healthy set of practices to fold into your emotion regulation repertoire. Um, and I will say that was a late set of tools for me to start applying because I had been raised growing up. The moment there's a problem, you dive into it. You roll up your sleeves, you get to the bottom of it. And what I've learned is sometimes a lot of good comes from just taking some time away and not dealing with it right away, avoiding coming back to it later. And that kind of strategic attention deployment, that's something to think about trying as well.
Yeah, for sure. My husband always says if I write an email and I'm really upset, he says, you can write it, but don't send it yet. Just wait. Come
Yes,
back to it in like an hour
that's right. Or a
and
day.
or a day, depending how upset you are, I guess. Yeah, for sure. Okay.
I just
This is
loved how much that worked so well for your grandmother, even though no one taught her what she was doing. It just was how she figured out how to survive and be successful and have this great life. But she didn't need a therapist or a book, or nobody told her or explained to her what she was doing. She was just doing it, and she did it really well.
Well, I think so many of us stumble on effective tools to help us live our lives and maybe figure things out on our own. Maybe we hear something from a friend, we get advice, or pick it up from a television show or whatever. And my hope with this book and the reason I'm like grateful for you sharing this science with other people is you don't have to stumble. Like we can do a lot better for people by actually giving them the tools. The analogy I often like to give people is like imagine that you've never been in a gym before and you just dropped in a gym and you don't know to do any exercises. You'd probably figure out how to do some things to make you stronger. But then you work with a personal trainer or you take a course like now you're going to know how to really optimize your physical health routine because you're going to know these you should do these movements with these ones and how to do it and when to rest. And that's I think the opportunity that we find ourselves in right now. Like we can give people those kinds of guidance, but
to further that metaphor, which is beautiful. It also helps minimize injury.
absolutely you could get into big trouble as you know we didn't get into this, but like sensory experiences can be super, super helpful for shifting people's emotions. They can also get people into lots of trouble if they're abused,
Yeah.
like risky, sexual practices and things like that. So you want to be careful there.
Ethan, we like to ask our guests two questions. The first one is, what would you like our listeners to take away from today's episode? An easy action item or a set of mindset shifts that you can recommend to our listeners who want to start making lasting change?
If you experience negative emotions, there's nothing wrong with you. This is how we are built. They can serve a useful function, but science-based tools exist to help you manage them. There are no one-size-fits-all solutions. So what that means for all of you who are listening is start learning about the different tools that are out there. They're easy to use, and then start experimenting them with them to figure out which ones work best for you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Ethan, here at Digestible, we like to say don't panic, just pivot. Because trying to make changes can be overwhelming for anyone. Would you be willing to share a pivot or a small change that you've made in your life that's made a big difference?
I love that phrase. I would say don't panic, just shift instead of pivot, but we can split hairs.
Maybe for today.
We talked earlier about avoidance and strategic avoidance, and actually, one thing that has really been useful, with my relationship with my wife is I have learned that when we get into a tiff, to not try to get in there right away and fix it in the moment, to like, all right, let's take some breathing room here, put it aside, come back to it tomorrow, a couple hours later, rather than trying to muscle through to get an answer right away, which is was my default. And I think that has helped us um, repair any fights after any fights a lot quicker than we otherwise would have.
That's
I
great.
like that.
Thank you for coming on the
Thank you so
Digestible
much.
podcast today. We really appreciate you taking the time, Ethan, and your books are wonderful. If you haven't checked them out yet, Shift and Chatter by Ethan Kross.
To spend time with you both, and good luck with the podcast. And Melissa, I'll see you around. And Stacey, I'm sure maybe I'll get to meet you in person next time you're in town too.
I hope so. Thanks so much, Ethan.
Thank you for listening to the Digestible podcast with our guest, best-selling author Ethan Kross. We hope you enjoyed some tools in today's podcast that you can apply to your life and your health journey. If you found today's episode worth sharing, please do. Send us your screenshots either to social media post comment, in a DM to the Digestible Podcast, or email us at info@digestiblestrategies.com. We look forward to hearing from you, and remember, don't panic, just pivot. The content shared on this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. We are not medical professionals, and the views expressed here are not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any health conditions. Always consult with a qualified healthcare provider before making any health-related decisions.